Hello, internet friends, and welcome to episode number 176 of Final Boss TV. Today we are talking about the state of tanking in the battle for Azeroth. Hello, my name is Adam K, aka Bay, as it most normally is, I think, every week. Next week will be the state of melee, then a week off for the holidays, and then the year-end special will be the week after that. We have Brutal, Taliesin, and Evitel on that, where we're talking about some things in the future. The epic WoW Battles of History is coming up, and all, of course, extra shows. Every single individual spec show will be in 2019, hopefully. It's a lot of stuff to talk about. We'll have like a pattern for it, and there'll be some repeat guests and some old guests and some new guests. So if you want all of your spec shows, those will be there. And then sprinkled in, we have some community specials along the way that aren't even tied to World of Warcraft. So what is that going to be like? But of course, thank you very much to the patrons of the show, making sure that I can actually keep doing this gig. Thank you very much to the credited assistant producers and beyond, getting those extra podcasts, the show notes, and soon all of the physical goodies that I can actually send out, as well as the holiday cards going out here for the holiday season 2018. So if you would like to support the show, the stream, and everything in between, and get more of the show, that is over on the show's Patreon page. We are this after show today will mark one away. So the year end, the Melee show gets to be 50 extra podcasts. There's 50 extra extras of the damn show. What the heck? So you can go back through, check all that stuff out if you like, get some physical stuff, swag, merch, whatever you would like to support, whatever you think it is worth to you. Me talking to all these nerds. Thank you very much for supporting the show all these many years. But today, again, we are talking about the state of tanking. So, putting you on the spot right off the show, why we were a little bit behind schedule, but if you're watching this on YouTube or listening to it in the future on iTunes or Google Play, you have no idea what just happened. Max, welcome back to the show, sir. Hello.
Hello. Yeah, sorry I was late. Yeah, it's all.
No, what'd you get to drink? That's the important part.
I got the #1 beverage, water.
Fair.
I drink it all day, and I got a bunch of it. It'll be good.
Sounds good to me. We have fresh meat on the show today. Shaq, welcome. Hi, sir.
What's up, guys? Pretty happy to be here. I got iced tea on my side, not water.
Oh, well, that's part of it is. Are you actually still farming AP in the background right now?
Nope, I'm good now.
Oh, are you sure? I mean, someone might reset during the show. You gotta go.
No, we're good.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here, sir. And returning, a blast from the past, Munkky. Welcome back, sir. How you doing?
Pretty good, man. Pretty good.
Are you ready to talk about... See, you were saying in the opening preamble that Max is here to talk all the time, Shaq's here to be cute, and you're just here to maybe talk about numbers like here and there. Is that correct?
No, Shaq's here to talk about Mythic Plus. I'm here to be cute.
Oh.
And math sometimes.
Oh, okay. I mean, that's fair. Chat will decide who the cutest one is on the show, or the YouTube comments. It'll never be me, which is totally fine, and it better not be me. But we have a whole lot of stuff to get through today in the more discussion, fashion-oriented stuff. But opening bants, shout-outs, introductions. I'm going to go back to Munkky. First off, sir, who the heck are you? What do you dabble in World of Warcraft? And how long have you been getting smacked around by raid bosses, dungeon bosses, anything like that?
I write the Vengeance guide for both Wowhead and Icy Veins. Been the main theory crafter for it, guide writer since Legion Alpha. I work with a bunch of the other tank theory crafters in various discords. I'm not as involved, but I do help them out and just read on their stuff and try to interact with the community as much as I can. I've been doing tanking since High Mall. Well, Siege of Orgrimmar is when I started to tank, to dabble, and then during High Mall is when I actually went full force into it.
Nice. What got you tanking?
Same story as probably 95% of other tanks. We had bad tanks, and or were tanks left and some need to fill the shoes. So I filled it.
Fair enough. Shaq, how about you, sir? Who the heck are you? For those that don't know who you are on the internet and what you dabble in with tanking.
I'm a young boy doing some Mythic Plus keys. Basically, that's.
Yeah.
I don't really do much raid tanking. I started tanking back at the start of Legion because the main tank I used to play with a lot for those challenge modes just wanted the DPS for that expansion. Right. So I just started tanking in Legion at the start, and I picked up Venge DH, loved it. So been playing it kind of since. I've also done a little bit of raid tanking. I tanked Tumas Sagaris. I did that on my Blood DK for the whole tier while we were finding a new main tank for our guild. So that was a lot of fun too.
Nice. And so what got you started then in tanking specifically?
Oh, what got me started? I mean, it's mainly just my friend wanted to DPS, so we kind of swapped roles. So I started tanking, really enjoyed it. I loved just having control on what was going to happen in the dungeon, where to position the mob.
Sounds good to me. And then for the MDI stuff, to get that out there and officialized, part of the Method MDI team for NA or not, or laws prohibiting?
It's kind of, yeah. It's kind of an in-between. I'm like a part of the team, but yeah, like not a part of it, I guess.
Can we get Shaq a part of the team officially? Chat, let's get on that. Twitch chat can make anything happen. So
yeah.
And then Max, back around to you, sir. In case anyone doesn't know who this beard belongs to, who the heck are you? What do you dabble in with tanking, sir?
Can you hear my mic? I can't hear my push-to-talk thing.
You're good.
Oh, cool. Okay. So I'm the GM and raid leader of Limit is what I do primarily. I started tanking 5-6 years ago. I was a DPS for a long time. Probably got my prominence in like, you know, top raiding guilds as a DPS. And then, yeah, same story as most. The tanks in our guilds weren't good enough for what we were trying to do. And I basically tanked the end boss of every mop boss on a Guardian Druid. And then started the next expansion. Then we made Limit around 3 years ago, and I've been tanking ever since. I've done top 5 world progression on every single tank class except for DH, but I've done a lot of testing on it. And I've done around a 20 on every tank class besides Vengeance and Guardian for like Mythic Plus stuff. And I stream all the time now, and I actually just started doing that, and I give most of my input there. Like people, it's pretty much like a Q&A session while I'm doing this endless AP grind every day. So that's pretty much what I do right now. I just do tank stuff.
Just tank stuff. And when did tank stuff start officially then for you?
Again, at the beginning of MOP.
Right. Just
on end bosses, I played Feral for every like raid and in farm, but on end bosses, I always had to tank like, you know, Lei Shen, Raden, Garrosh, stuff like that. In Duality, and then when we made Limit, I've been tanking in Limit ever since. Well, I had a couple of times where I've DPS'd. We've always been trying to find a tank, so I am not stuck in this eternal torment. To be clear, progression tanking is awesome, and it's like super intuitive. Like, yeah, obviously, like farm tanking is whatever gets it down, and that's why it would be preferable to switch. But
right,
I love it, and I spend a good number of my days also relating to like people who don't look at tanking the way I do. And like, I like to learn a lot about how people look at it if, you know, they just main one class and the balance of the game around that. So I'm a student of the game.
There you go. So then I guess the first topic I wanted to bring up, which I brought up with every state of show so far. So we have the healers and the range DPS already, tanking today, melee DPS next Sunday. The change that sort of set the community a little bit ablaze with contempt for it from Legion to Battle for Azeroth was the GCD change. Now, some of that's being removed a little bit and loosened in the future, even though some of the movement abilities that are coming off are like, all right, we're almost there. But Munkky, from all the guide writing stuff that you've put together and all the discords that you've sort of osmosed, did the GCD change really affect tanks other than, I guess, Prot Warrior? What do you say?
Bear got a lot of its utility and various abilities. It got put on the GCD. Vengeance got our fiery brand, and Blood got Death Grip, got a little one, and Dancing Rune Weapon. Overall, it's mainly been just kind of certain utility abilities or certain was it damage increasing abilities like Avenging Wrath or Paladin, stuff like that. It's just it feels bad to play, but the thing with tanking is that you really want, there's a lot of like on the fly things of, you know, I parried a few abilities and my health is fine. Then all of a sudden I didn't parry anything. And now I'm at 10% health. Crap. I need to do something about it. And, you know, when you're in the middle of a GCD, then, you know, and you can't pop your abilities, like it feels bad, like Firebrand for Vengeance, and then there's Demo Shout for Warrior and stuff. Like there's just these defensive abilities, even though they provide an offensive gain, they shouldn't be on the global cooldown, because it hurts us. It hurts the in the moment thing, because, you know, we try to plan for as much as we can, but there's always certain instances where, you know, maybe we don't parry enough or block enough or whatever, and it just, you know, we get screwed over by RNG. And that's, you know, tank health is a healer mechanic. And that's, I mean, that's how Blizzard wants it to be. And tanks, to a certain extent, have the tools to mitigate that, but they're also trying to hinder us in how we do so.
Right.
And it feels bad.
Yeah. Max, anything you want to add to the GCD stuff, since you've been dabbling in all the different tanks? Because I think it affects different people. This is the most thing I've heard every show so far. It's just that it's like, What you got?
Yeah, so of the things that were changed, the one that I feel like is the least effective is like the Hand of Protector on Paladin. It got changed in a different way, where healing people was based off the Paladin's health instead of the targets, which they're changing back. And that was the real nerf to that. I feel like that inability, it's like you can play around it, and it's like, okay, I should have like not been on GCD there when I needed to heal. It's like foresight. And Frenzied Regen is the opposite. And the main problem with tanks in this expansion, I feel like the GCDs is something that's been harped about, but it's much more like, you know, they took away every tank's innate, tangible way to deal with anything they're dealing with. Like, you know, almost every tank last expansion, at least relative to this one, you know, you just didn't die if it was up to you, right?
Right.
Like they made a lot more of it, even though it's still at the point like if you play with a tank that is looking through his death log and looking for like healing to blame why he died, that guy's still wrong. Like if you die as a tank, it's 100% your fault every time. But it's like the GCD stuff, the big thing was like less of the GCD of Frenzied Regen, even though it is a reactive ability. It was kind of like a Death Strike mechanic heal, where it like healed a percentage of the damage you took, and then they made it a flat rate, and that was a huge nerf to that. It was less about the GCD. It was the GCD and that made the overall thing feel worse. And then Ignore Pain on Warrior, for example, was, I mean, it's bad. The class is actually much better than a lot see it to be, but that it like makes it feel bad. Like I'm actually almost positive that's why that class was so underused at the beginning of this expansion. Was it just, when you have like, it's such a high APM class as opposed to other tanks, and that it would just slowed it down so much, and it had nothing to do with reactive or anything like that. It's not a reactive spell like Hand of Protector and Frenzied Regen. It just made it feel really bad. In fact, on this topic, I actually did a poll right before the beginning of the expansion, and it had, you know, over 500 entries in it. And I just asked like the WoW community, and it's possible my Twitter is more geared towards like higher end players than like, you know, most of the community, because I didn't stream at the time. But I mean, 6% said they liked the changes of specifically tank. I did not put everything, just specifically like the tank GCD changes, and I noted some specifically. And, you know, 10% were indifferent, and almost 80%, like in quotes, hated it. But you know, it's obviously they're trying to have an effort of slowing the game down. For one, they clearly want that on many fronts and many different classes. And on top of that, I think they want it like the casual audience, people who are getting into the game, to have less decisions to make every global cooldown. I think that was also a large portion of why they made that change, because they haven't spoken too openly on it. But yeah, they're seeming to kind of pry back a little bit from it, which is great. And I hope they do more of that in the future. The Ignore Pain change is like life changing. Like, right, you get to spend so much rage. You don't rage cap in your cooldowns. I mean, everything is so much better, just specifically because of that. Because
the main point that goes in with this, and what I'll toss over to Shakib as well to sort of touch on, is that you as the player may input decisions into the game, your priorities on the GCD, right? You have that cadence of how the game plays, but the damage going into your face from elements outside of your control aren't on the GCD as well. So you reacting to a slower pace than what's happening to you doesn't always work. And I think the thing that accentuates that is like doing gigantic Mythic Plus pulls, right? So, I mean, Shaq, when you pull 20 mobs, what may or may not happen there? Do you actually pull and like wait sometimes for big spikes of damage to then react to, or are you always trying to be ahead of it? Like, what happens with that?
Usually it depends. Like if I'm sitting, like sometimes you kind of just want to keep doing the rotation, right? At least for Vengeance, but the GCDs can definitely impact your. Like you won't have time if you're doing a big pull. You kind of have to. If I'm full health, I'll wait like a second or half a second to make sure that I'll get the most values out of like all of my souls at once instead of using them then having. Because the way Vengeance works is you kind of have to wait 2 or 3 globals in between your spirit bombs to rebuild them.
Right.
So if I use one, then like just drop right away, then I won't have any way to recover. So I kind of have to hold sometimes for sure.
Well, we'll see if it gets a little bit more smooth in the patch coming up here. But I'm going to backpedal a little bit because I scrolled my notes too far forward yet again and sort of go over where some good information is out there. Of course, Munkky was already going over the Wowhead and Icy Vein stuff earlier. There's another resource that it's out there that could still use some tweaking and tuning here and there. And of course, as 8.1 goes around, more of that will happen. But what kind of resources should tank players look at that or maybe you need to look at for if they're getting into tanking or if they're just making sure they're on the same page with what's sort of been osmosed around? So, hey, Munkky, what's out there for players?
Honestly, one of the best answers is Twitch and YouTube. So you can watch guys like Max, Shakib, Max doing raids and dungeons, Shakib doing dungeons, various things. There's plenty, they post their stuff on YouTube and especially like early kill videos when you're doing progress, watching people of your tank, either your tank spec or people that are doing whatever job strategy you're doing on the fight. So like say you're doing Bloods on Talic, for instance, like just looking, okay, how did X tank do it in a guild that's already killed it or whatever. So utilize those because they're visual, and when you're in all these guys' streams, you can ask them questions, all of that. So those are like some of the best resources. There's also Wowhead and Icy Veins. I'm cool with them because I rate for them. And I do want to make a note to mention with that is that even if you have bias against a site, like say you don't like Icy Veins for whatever reason, say you played a spec that the guide wasn't as good, then you can, just remember that each guide is written by a different person, or maybe some people write multiple guides or whatever, but not all guides are the same. It's how good a guide is based on the guide writer. So if I write A and some other guy does the same guide for another site and writes B, then you got to figure out, which one is right. So it just don't have bias. Go into it with an open mind, especially going into an expansion. Both sites have gotten a bunch of new writers for many of the specs. So give them a second chance if you haven't already. Obviously utilize to go with that, there's also the class discords. Many of them have their own sites. So like the locks have lock one-stop shop and all that. So just utilize Discord and those various sites to help you with how to play your spec or your class or whatever it is. Then finally, we have a buddy of mine, Panthea, who if you're in the Monk Discord, the Paladin Discord, or the DK Discord, he's pretty active in all those. I know he's also active in Dreamgrove a little bit and a little tiny bit in Fellhammer. But he has the tank notes. So tanknotes.tk. So what he does on this site is he basically works with the community on various things and just getting information. So he tests a lot of the bosses and he pulls up these tank notes that are just their notes on how to do each fight, how to do each role within the fight, and he has special tips for each of the tank specs that are utilized. Either he creates them himself or he works with others. So like for instance, I help him with the Vengeance side. So I give him feedback on the Vengeance, say, hey, here's the suggested talents, here's the suggested like strategies, like here you can use Fear Sigil here, you can use grip here, or whatever. So that will help you with the fights themselves. As far as Mythic Plus and stuff, that's more Shakib's territory. But again, that goes more towards watching YouTube and the strategies on Twitch, watching them actively playing it.
Yeah, I did not. So these resources that keep getting pulled up, created, and sorted through here on Tank Notes, I didn't know this existed. The overall layout and how the website works, really, really well thought out, honestly, because you go to the actual encounter and then you have this little section on the bottom, but then when you go a little bit extra, right, you can go into each individual tank spec and it will change the whole page you're already on to then give different specifics on each individual tank class. So this is a really awesome resource that I hope continues to get developed and worked on and move forward. I know a lot of things right now in the beginning of expansion are always kind of like, meh. And some things come up and they're good or bad or not great. But 8.1, the quote-unquote real launch of the expansion, I hope to see a lot more fine-tuned pieces of the puzzle, right? So that'll be fun. That'll be fun to hear about. But Max, do you have anything that you want to toss out there in the resource category?
I'm probably the absolute worst person. I don't use many resources. I just have like a group of people, I guess, that I typically talk to about stuff like this, which are,
right,
players in the high-end community. And then also, I mean, like I said, the only resource I need is like I turn on my stream, people ask me questions, and they'll usually sometimes help. Sorry about the dog.
You're fine.
They'll usually come up and they'll be like, oh, did you see this? Did you see how this changed? Stuff like that. So that's pretty much where I get like most of my information. Then I like to talk about it creatively with people and figure out what could be good at what. Do a lot of trial and error more than resources for me. So yeah, I don't know anything.
You don't know anything. How about Shakib? How about for Mythic Plus? Is there anything specific out there that you want to give a shout out to, or anything that you use in Mythic Plus world?
I don't think there's like website style. I don't think there's any of that. It's more just going through, kind of just checking VODs and stuff to see, like, just keep up to date with all the routes, the different strategies that there is. Try to adapt from those, or maybe use them or create off of them. Because the routes kind of change every single time you do a dungeon. You might adapt, like one pull, one mob, you might change a little something. So I don't think it's more resources. It's just checking other people run them so that you don't stay in your own like click and just keep doing the same route over and over, thinking it's the best one.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, there's a little bit out there. I guess there's some. So I've plugged this before on the show just to make sure that everyone's on the same. There's a website. It's Mythic Plus. It's mythicpl.us. Now this is put together, and right now it sort of just goes over all the different hotfixes that ever touch any of the affixes, which if you haven't been keeping up with all of them, there's quite a lot. So they keep up with all the Mythic Plus changes in that regard. The affix breakdown, which is definitely helpful, especially when the new affix gets put in. The Reaping affix very soon, the new seasonal one. And then the breakdown of the weeks, group considerations, keystone, all this. There's resources here that are definitely good. Yeah, that's
actually a pretty nice website. I knew about the website back in Legion, but it was way less than this. It was like the affix weeks, and then that was it. So this is definitely a lot better now.
Yep. Oh, it's definitely come a long way. Absolutely. And then sort of on top of that, if this is obviously just an extra bit, but have to give a shout out over to the Method Dungeon tools if you want. And you're basically, if you're learning Mythic Plus, then route planning and entire dungeon breakdowns are really, really helpful. And this is all done just in the game code, right? Inside the game, everything that's really shout out to Naga for making this thing. It's just an absolute wizard. So you can definitely go check that out. The Method Dungeon tools for Mythic Plus. And then if no one else has anything, I have the little side plugs that I brought up the last couple of shows, especially because everything's going to be changing 8.1. Azerite.info. Nice little website that you may or may not know about. Now, for DPS, this might help organize things. But there's actually a new optimal sets breakdown that's happening. I actually really wonder if they're going to be having a sort of parity with you can look at for tanks or look at for DPS. So, but you can go through, like you can go Death Knight, and then you can get all the different traits, and especially all the new traits that are getting added. Well, all the new traits, or the ones that are getting removed. You can break those all down and find out where those are on gear, right? And we want some Bones of the Damned, and it'll show you all the gear pieces that it lists on. You can find out where all those go. And then, yeah, optimal sets. On top of that, of course, Blood Mallet. You're not always tanking. Sometimes you want a DPS. So go check out Blood Mallet's website. Bloodmallet.com breaks down all the Azeroth traits in the DPS stack. And of course, they just updated about 8.1. Results were shaky. Probably changed in the next week. So lots of different changes and nerfs and buffs and tweaks and being removed, whatever. So those are two good resources you can check out there also. There's a lot of stuff out there. And I have to keep up with all these different resources because there's way too many things that the community keeps making to figure out what the heck Blizzard is doing with their damn game. So, on that note, Shaq, I'm going to go back to you on this one because the range DPS show last week had a bit of a discussion about the whole meta that's happening in Mythic Plus right now. Are you a slave to this meta to melee when ranged? What do you run?
I guess recently I've kind of been, but meta like tank wise I haven't at all. I've been playing Vengeance like nonstop, but recently I've been kind of with the status of Vengeance. I've just kind of shifted over to Havoc so I can stay on my main and still keep playing them until there's some changes that come in for Mythic Plus. So in that way I'm kind of following the meta because Havoc is in a very good spot, but hopefully Vengeance can somehow come back at some point, because like in Legion it was fun because it was still in the top 2 for Mythic Plus, but now it's not really up there, at least in my opinion. So I'm trying to shift so that we can try to push the highest keys that we can. Okay,
that's fair. What about so do you have an ideal comp that you run with? And does comp change based on the dungeon or the affixes or both, or do you have the same people, or what is it?
It can. Recently the comp I've been having the most fun and the most success with is probably Blood DK, Resto Druid, Havoc Rogue, and Fire Mage or Frost Mage.
Oh,
that's probably the comp that we've been having the most success with. I also enjoy playing with a Boomkin. That'll happen mostly on like weeks with Necrotic, the tank. The Boomkin is just treants are insane at the moment for tanks. It's basically a free reset, so very, very powerful in those weeks.
Now, what's also a slight reset is Elemental Shaman, Resto Shaman, or Enhancement Shaman's Earth Elemental.
Yeah, that also works. The only thing is, I think Druid is like a minute CD, while Earth Ellie is what, 3 or 5 minutes?
Hey, they're trying, all right? Rocky is Rocky's a good boy. All right.
Big Rock.
He's trying. I have to give a shout out, at least something. Shaman's just too long of a cooldown. I
played with one. I gave last X-Fight. I did not play with a single one. This one I played with one twice. So there's a chance.
There's a chance. Max, how about you? Are you a meta slave when you run your high keys, or you're probably more like me? You use like a 11, 12 every week, and then just like wait for the box of disappointment every week. But
we did them a couple weeks ago. Me, Jeeth, and a couple of people.
Yeah.
And when they were like decent mods, the thing is with me and Mythic Plus, I just don't do Mythic Plus on like mods that make the game less fun to play, like bolstering and explosive and necrotic and things like that. But like this week, for example, is pretty good. And it was like 4 weeks ago, it was like Tyrannical Volcanic, something that's super easy. But yeah, so the tank meta, or sorry, not the tank meta, just the in general meta for dungeons is very clear. And I actually was just talking about this in chat. The reason you see so much DH Rogue X, it's less 2 melee X, it's more DH Rogue X, or like Frost DK is very good. There's a couple of melee that are very good. But one, just in general, like all melee kind of have like some burst AoE, and not all ranged have that, which is very strange. But it's just kind of like how that works. And also like the fact that raid buffs are there. So like, you know, Havoc brings that. And also they just bring, I mean, it's just the most complete class. It has like, you know, has a dispel, best movement in the game, one of the best, if not the best personal in the game, can spec into an immunity, can fell rush through stuff, has infinite self-healing. They have a stun. They have a dispel, a purge. Like that's literally like endless. Like why the class is so good. And then rogues, you need shroud skips. And I was just talking about this in chat, is that you would see more spec switches, but a lot of people who do Mythic Plus, there's very, very few top raiders who even do Mythic Plus at all. Like very few. And kind of the meta in raid is in like, especially in the top world guilds is, you know, you have a lot of, or you have like good alts that like are like you bring for certain situations that are like better than what your class does. Like for example, like Moonkins in high-end guilds usually have like hunter alts or stuff like that because it's like more like single target, less multi-dot, and it has an immunity, just like things that are different than what they bring. But Raider IO doesn't give you a score based on the highest ones you've done on your account. It only tracks the highest you've done on one single character. So you don't see a lot of people doing a lot of class switching and optimizing groups for specific dungeons in the tank and DPS roles because, you know, you're furthering your one character. I mean, I don't do anything like that. I don't know what my Raider IR score is or ever will care about that. But that's mainly the reason, other than that's just not really what I do. But like you'd see other stuff in that. Like for example, like Blood DK right now and even in the patch is going to be like, you know, the go-to safe tank for most dungeons and all like it's like the overall like covers most situations. It's the best at kiting. They have great self-healing, things like that. There's dungeons where other tanks more than just Monk are like better in specific dungeons on specific mods, right? Or I guess on all mods except for one very specific one being Necrotic. That's brought out, but people aren't going to do it on that week because if they time a key with a better tank, that doesn't increase their Raider IO score on their main. Does that make any sense? So right, I think that's why you see a lot of people doing running a lot of the same comp because those comps are more applicable for every situation you can run into, like coming with the next week, assuming that's what you want to do.
Okay, there's just a lot of little things that fly around there, and it's funny that Shakib brings up. Let me see, I don't have all this stuff ready to go on the side monitor here. It brings up the whole Vengeance Demon Hunter versus Blood DK back and forth, but aren't like a lot of big keys right now actually on Vengeance?
Not really. I think it's mainly Blood and actually Monk. Like Monk is doing very good, and I think in 8.1 like Warrior will probably do good in some of them.
Yeah, Warrior even right now is like undoubtedly like the best tank in like 2 dungeons, but it's like it's kind of like the problem with that class even when they buff it is that it's really hard to main because it literally cannot deal with necrotic and it cannot do like bleeds or like spell damage when it can't reflect it. But like in dungeons where on Tyrannical you can spell reflect bosses, or if there's a lot of trash, it'll do way more damage than every tank. It's very doable, and it takes the least amount of damage even right now before the buffs. Physical blockable damage, less damage, and requires less healing than any tank in any scenario. Whether you're with a healer, without a healer, any of that shit sorry. But yeah, it's getting buffed to a lot, but again, it's not going to be like, it's unplayable on necrotic, and you know and then on top of that, in certain dungeons with bleeds, it's just like when you get to a high enough level, it's just a liability. Like what is it in Motherlode with the 2 bosses that melee with magic damage, the last 2 bosses? Like on Tyrannical, that Warrior's so good in that instance, but they just get, just pummeled on those bosses. So it's like, Prods can be really good, again, if people follow the mentality of like, playing the character that's best for the dungeon instead of just play your main. You'll see a lot of it in raid as well. Yeah,
we'll definitely have to see.
We were doing keys this week with Darky, and we for under we had to do a 20 Tyrannical, and the only reason we even got close was because he jumped on the Warrior.
Oh,
because you just need it, because you have to kill that first boss in like a minute 10-ish, and you just need that spell.
You need that spell reflect that comes up as the one. That brings me to the next big topic here, I suppose, because the Mythic Plus obviously a big topic of the community overall, but the meta, right, and how it distills out, and obviously at a high end, right, we're talking like 20 plus keys right now. There's going to be a bit of a meta, and that might shift a little bit with 8.1 on the horizon, but what sort of is this hierarchy within the tanking meta, and what are your personal power picks right now versus what may be changing in a week, right? The patch is Tuesday. So Max, what have you distilled from what you've seen? And then we'll see what Munkky's got from Discord.
Raid or dungeons?
Let's do raids
Or
first
both.
for you. Yeah. Go for
Okay,
raids.
so the situation right now in raids, if any particular raid was going to come out with balanced raid mechanics of like, you know, some magic tank nukes, some physical ones, some like, you know, just like a wide array of things. I mean, the best overall class to start progression on. See, I look at this differently, and in my opinion, playing like you can main any class, any of the 6 tank classes right now if that's your thing. I'm gonna look at this from more of a high end perspective. Like if you main a druid in some guild, like you can never die and do really well, and as long as like you have the abilities to do that, you'll do great. But just speaking of like how you would look at it in a top guild,
right?
Monk is always the thing you go to initially because it's just the safest and you can recover from bad things happening easier. Usually when you either have a worse player at Monk or when something goes wrong, they just require more healing, but it's harder for them to die, which for progression is great. You would always take that trade-off, assuming it's not like being under-healed or you're like crammed on healing or something. But then, at least how we look at it, Dark and I, is that you look what you can take away. It's like, okay, do we need more damage? I could go way more damage build. Or like, oh, maybe this fight could use this. Like we could play a paladin and, you know, have a damage reduction on the raid. You could have tier 3 traits into bubble. You can bubble the whole raid. You can, every 10 seconds, you can do something on the GCD that heals people for 60% of their health, which only one healer can do with an ability, and it's on a minute cooldown, and yours is 10 seconds. And then you also have lay on hands, you have sack, you have spell warding, all that stuff. And it's like, okay, would it be better for me to better support on this boss? Paladin's great. Or like, is this boss entirely physical? If a boss is entirely physical, especially in the change 9.1 with warriors where they have a higher block up time, you would play a warrior instead of a monk. It's actually that good. But it just depends on the fight. Obviously, like for just to give some analytics now, like before the patch, before things are being changed, buffed or nerfed, like the best metric to look at is tanking the actual boss of Fetid, because it's about 80% uptime. It's only melees, and it's a great metric to look at tons of data on Warcraft logs about how much or how well each tank does on average versus that, and how much healing they require and things like that. And Warrior's the lowest by a pretty fair amount, and it's being buffed pretty significantly in the patch. And then, like, obviously the off-tank job on Fetid is pretty specific to a couple of things, but it also does it's tied for first with that as well. But yeah, I mean, basically you always go with a monk, and then you take away what you can. You're like, okay, this doesn't need this much. There's nothing really bursty on this fight where you need that. You know, we could play warrior for the raid buff or rally or more damage, or we could play paladin for the raid utility, or the perfect alt if you main a brewmaster, which so many people do, obviously, because of its state right now. I bet the best alt to have is Blood DK. They're amazing, even after the changes. In fact, and I guess to preface what I'm about to say, the changes don't really do anything in the patch. DK definitely got a hit. Monk didn't. The monk change doesn't matter. The warrior's getting a big buff. Paladin's got a great trait. Demon Hunters remaining mostly the same. Druids are becoming very usable in high-end rating because of the roar change, but only because of that. But sometimes that's the most important thing. Sequel Jaden. And yeah, so I mean, as it stands, like going into the patch, you still play a Blood DK for the same reasons you play it. Same with a monk. So like Blood DK heals the best on magic damage. For example, tanking Gahoon, just strictly tanking him in a 2-tank or whatever setup you have. Like Blood DK is by far the best tank on that boss. Like you can tank him to like 50 stacks in the last phase when your healers die, and like no other tank can really do that, specifically just because Blood DK's mitigation is so centered around the damage you take, and it doesn't care if it's magical or physical. On a normal pull on that boss, it's going to be roughly half and half when you're actually tanking him. And other classes don't deal as well with that. And that's like the perfect thing for monk, because monk over time struggles with that, and they fall behind and require significantly more healing while being more safe. So it's like, you know, you still have a lot of options. So the meta right now is going to stay much of the same, except you will see higher end guilds using more things like paladin and warrior in the next tier, because there will be fights that those tanks are very sufficient at, specifically bosses where there's a decent enough taunt swap and you know what you're doing and you can have active mitigation up. You know, obviously, like a paladin, for example, are very vulnerable when they don't have Shield of the Righteous, but you can, if you're on a boss where you're only tanking half the time and you can have it up all the time, they're extremely competitive with every tank, and they provide, I mean, infinitely more utility if it's used on a good player. So I would say the tank meta as far as rankings doesn't really change, except that druids are by far the worst tank as far as like the amount of healing they receive, the abilities they have to deal with things, their self-sustainability, the damage they reduce, all of it. In every metric, they are the worst. But they have 1 minute roar, and that's extremely valuable. And they're also very easy to play at a basic level, and almost I'd say the easiest to play at an optimal level. So you'll see a lot of druid play, I believe, on a couple of specific bosses in the raid.
Sounds good. Now, on the stuff that you sponge up, Munkky, and you kind of noted at this as like a jab beginning of the show about how you talking people down or from away from the the hyperbole that comes up in the Discord community. Are you echoing a little bit of what Max is saying, or what have you sort of seen? What are all the questions that you have to filter through about what's happening on Tuesday with tanks?
Honestly, I actually went over and wrote down notes, and Max said everything I had in my notes. So
okay, there you go.
So there's that.
Yeah, I ramble, sorry.
No, you good, man. You good. But yeah, no, the thing that I guess I'll hit on from the community side of the whole, what's meta, what's good, what's bad, and all of that, is that people obsess so much over what's meta, and that they play like they really like druid, but then their raid leader, like they're in some like top like 2,000 guild or something, like they get onto Gahoo in the last week of Prague, or the last week before the next tier, and then the raid leader is like, oh well, you have to go monk because it's it's better than druid. And it's like, well, at that point, you have 20 more eye levels in gear than everybody else did at the beginning, and you have all the experience and everything, all the nerfs and all this and that, and just people stress too much about what's meta and what's not. And Max hit on it as well of, if you're outside of the super high level, where method and limit and all that are at, you can kind of play most any tank and do well. And and this relates to dungeons as well. If you're not pushing 20, if you're not trying to push MDI champion, then you can play most any tank, up to through 15s. Every tank is completed through 15s, and I think every tank is completed through like 18s or 19s. So every tank can progress and can do this stuff. Every tank has killed Gahoon since before the initial nerfs to him. It's people just need to learn that it's a game. Play what you enjoy, and actually one thing that we kind of discussed back during Legion was that one of the Discord's tank chat has a tank ranking they usually keep up, and people ask for tank rankings all the time because what's meta and whatnot. They want to play what's good. And one of the caveats we always put with it is, this is what the rankings are in our opinion, but at the same time, if you have to ask what the rankings are, you're not in a position where this matters for you. It can help you, yes. It can help to have a brewmaster over a druid in a guild, if your healers are weak or whatever. But in the end, it's a game. It's your free time. It's your money that you're paying every month. It's your money that you're paying for the expansion. Play what you want. Play what you enjoy. Don't play something else just because somebody else tells you, just because your raid leader says, oh, monks are this, so you have to have a monk. Play what you want.
Right.
And that's one of the things that we have to deal with constantly in the community. And, I love the limit guys, and I think guys are all really cool. But like whenever they do a class, if maybe say like warriors didn't get a lot of love, if you go you go in there and you talk to warriors and stuff, and then it's all doom and gloom and everybody hates life and nobody wants to do this and that, and it's just it's sad. It feels bad when you're one of the tanks, and because I play Vengeance is my main. Well, right now I'm playing Monk. I'm kind of playing multiple tanks, but Vengeance has been my main, and I've had to talk people down and try to just like lighten the mood, make things easier, and just make people realize that yes, Vengeance is weak in raids right now, but you're not in a position. You're not raiding in limit. You're not trying to get in the limit or method or whatever. Just play what you want to play. And it's just, that's one of the main things that we have to constantly get on, especially if you're an undervalued spec or a bad spec or whatever it is.
Yeah. Shakib, you want to put a bow in this real quick though, because if you've been basically doing all the Mythic Plus on Vengeance and you're not doing it all on Blood DK, which is the premier, right? But then in that regard, what do you have to add to this situation, I guess?
I mean, it's kind of the same thing. Like you're definitely gonna do probably better in most cases with some tanks like DK, but if you can play a class pretty well, you'll be able to do some pretty nice things anyway. Like even if you're not at the, like if you're going for top keys, then for sure you'll want to play that. That's like that's the reason I'm doing just up there, like 95%, 99% of other keys. You'll be completely fine with any tank.
Yeah.
And you can adapt, you can make strats around your tank, and everything can go well. Unless you're playing like 5 out of meta, I guess, or classes.
I guess there's extremes, but I think a lot of the people that run this realm are only doing like trying to push to 10s. Like the 10 is their ceiling, or 10 or 11s to play their ceiling, and it's just not. It's not that big of a deal. You kind of added, I've moved around the notes a little bit too, that there's a bubble when it comes to rating, and in this case now Mythic Plus in World of Warcraft, that the vast, larger majority of the game thinks that they have to play a certain way or a certain thing or a certain race or a certain talent setup or whatever. And you both all touched on this, like what is it like? What are your thoughts on this? And Munkky went over this a lot right there. But to just pick Max's brain on this just for a moment, because I got one more topic before we break the into the Q&A section, is that I want to, should players, and this is going to make Max laugh a little bit, should players sort of amalgamate or try to copy what you guys do? That comes up a lot. Like, well, Limit did this or Method did that. Like, should that be sort of the bread and butter everyone should be eating, or how should they distill? Right.
So how you do something, I mean, this is why like having access now that like one of the top guilds in the world streams, which hasn't been true ever in progression. It's basically just an extra mind. At least I spend most of my months up to a tier thinking about how we're going to do things, write stuff out, think about positioning, think about stuff like that. And you get access to all that information at one time. So even from like, if you're in any guild, you should take into account what guilds that spend a lot of their lives doing this as like valuable information. Should you copy it? It just depends on the situation. It depends on your players. Like for example, if we run a tank comp on a fight, like let's say Darky and I play like double paladin on some random boss next tier, and the only reason is because you do like you know, you just need these 2 spell wordings to deal with these debuffs, or you need to, like, for example, I had a paladin prepared this tier in case when we got to Gahoon, you could use abilities right away, so we could solo every single run. We built our comp around that until we figured out you couldn't do that. Like things like that. Like we could play 2 prop allies. All right, if a lot of guilds play 2 prop allies on a boss, depending on the boss, they will get crammed on, right? Like it will probably cost them more than, depending on the player's skill, to play things like a monk or something like that that's a little easier to play at a basic level.
Sure.
So on things like that, it's just totally on the leader of that guild or the leader of that raid to judge the player base. So getting away from strats, just what like comps people use. I mean, I think especially now that a lot of both of our guilds stream or other top guilds stream, is go in there and ask them, like, ask us why we did that. Because if you know that they did something and they know why they did it, then you can apply what you're doing with your guild to, you know, fit that same role, because you may not even have that option. Like a lot of the times having someone, like, especially now that you can run the orbs, everyone harps about 4 warlocks, and more recently about rogues on Zul for some reason. And it's like, oh, do I have my 385 hunter play his 370 lock so we have a 4th gateway? Like, absolutely not, especially if he's not that good at it, which, you know, a lot of people don't put a lot of time in their alts. A lot of time is what makes people good at anything in WoW. And, you know, they it just depends. So yeah, I would say if people are copying what top guilds are doing, I would at least try to understand why. I would never just take a very blanket thing like they do this, so we do this. That's wrong. That's not creative. And honestly, the main reason that we go for world first, or I guess we just started to, like, it's not even to get world first. It's the process. It's wanting to play with the people you're playing with, not having any liabilities in your raid, and like doing things without videos and killing it faster than anyone else is the most creatively challenging thing that any of us do. So we think a lot about it and we care a lot about it. So if people ask us, or at least try to pick the brain of why you make decisions in any guild of any rank, you know, you'll have an idea of why they did it, and then you can make the decision whether to copy it. That would be my answer to that.
Okay. So now I have like a paragraph that I want to read off here. The Melee show, which sandwiches this one, and the Rain show that happened last week, we had the same topic that we brought up, because now that it's not always about numbers in balancing out a comp. Obviously, there are only going to be 2 to possibly 3, if not even sometimes the 1 tank situation. But to round out the trifecta and talk about them from their perspectives, is there a better way that Blizzard could really let you bring the players that you want on the classes and specs they want to play, instead of having you have to bring 4 warlocks, 3 hunters, 5 rogues, 3 or 4 mages, take demon hunters over this, right? Or is the stacking and min-maxing nature just always going to be present itself, as long as there are defined niches for some classes and specs compared to others who lack the real utilizable reason to slot them in to either mythic raiding or mythic dungeons? Because the niche debacle now is the other hot topic, and not the store that sells t-shirts. I don't know who wants to jump into this first, because we all have different sides of what this goes into, because this is a lot that brings up, because the viable word is what I deal with a lot on my stream, right? I get talked to a lot about that because I sponge up all the stuff that you guys talk about on the show. I don't know if this is something that can be solved, or if Blizzard can do something about this, or it's just the state of the game. I don't know. Chat comes up with remove shroud, please.
Yeah, I feel like they've been kind of going for that, having every class have a special effect, but some of them just have way more powerful than others. Like the shroud or the buffs. Like, not the, I guess the warrior or mage or priest buffs aren't too bad, but like the DH or the monk buffs, where you can only have that class, or you won't have that buff at all on any sort of boss. That kind of helps to bring those classes, even if they're ever bad or something. But in the same way, it just doesn't really work out too well for bringing every class.
Well, that's
because you'll still stack stuff. Like if Rogue is super good, like on Zool, you'll still stack a bunch of them in a high top guild.
Well, until 8.1 anyway. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Shuriken combo. You have 2 days left to enjoy it, or 3 if you're EU. But you brought up the debuffs. The Mythic Plus show we had a few weeks ago. You can go check that out on YouTube, of course. The state of Mythic Plus was sort of the start of the series. You bring up the debuffs as a contentious point, and I've hated these things since beta, and I've reported feedback about them in the first place. But the 5% physical or magic, bringing up like a Brewmaster tank, or a Wheelmaker monk, or a Mistweaver monk, right? And the magic debuff from Demon Hunters doesn't really do a whole lot in Mythic Plus, unless you're doing a 20 Tyrannical or something, and then 5% becomes really more relevant. So do you only balance it around that for those buffs, or just always is still good?
I mean, it's really good, especially right now with like Mistweaver Monk, for example, being so good, or Brewmaster being so good, and then Havoc being so good. You kind of just having those two is kind of just a really strong bonus,
right?
That fits with the comp very well. So I don't know if it'd be the same if, like, let's say Monk was just really bad. Maybe it wouldn't be the same, but right now, it definitely hurts not having one of those buffs.
You got
at the top level, like it can cut out a little bit of time on the key, or even make some stuff faster.
You're fighting seconds on the higher keys.
That's
so
yeah. It can impact it quite a bit.
Max, your brain's gonna be on fire right now. I know this has come up before, so do you have anything? I don't really know.
Oh, you just got big gifts. Look at that.
Woo! Dang it.
Oh, Mia Pal, you're a cool one. You're a real one.
Yeah,
right.
you guys.
Can you like summarize the question into like 2 sentences, because it kind of is like a little bit of everything.
It has a little of everything. So the big thing that I talk about, it's the niche debacle, right? And in your perspective, when you're making your Mythic Plus raid, you brought up the prop paladin stuff, which is fine, But I just wonder if there's a better way that Blizzard could really let you bring the players you want on the classes they want to play, instead of having to play this, slot this because I have to, slot this because I have to, slot this because I have to.
At least at a very high end level. Well, I can talk about Mythic Plus in a second because I think that's a different argument.
Sure.
At like a high end rating level, it doesn't matter too much with 20 raiders. I can't speak too much about heroic raids. Like 10 mans is probably pretty bad. But like in 20 man, it's fine because like Priest is the literal best healer. Havoc DH is great. Warrior is great. You know, the classes that you need, I would say bringing Mage is the one thing that's like, you could definitely do some fights without one of them, but the other ones, it's like, you bring them anyway. So it doesn't affect you too much, but the fact that it scales to the rest of the game creates problems, especially Mythic Plus. Now, it's probably not something you build a huge comp around because there are scrolls for a lot of things, but like you said, there isn't one for Demon Hunter or Monk.
Right. I
remember at some point in the game when they had raid buffs, it was either in Kata or Mop or something like that, where they made a change at the end of the expansion. When you went into a dungeon or I think it was a challenge mode, you just got every buff, and you could see it on like your little buff tracker. Like when you zoned into a challenge mode or turned it on challenge mode, I forget exactly what it was.
Yeah, I remember that.
But the game desperately needs that. Like just add or make the Monk and DH buff not work, or just increase everyone's damage by 5% or reduce everything's health overall by 5%, and make that and make those not work and make that not a thing. Because yeah, it is kind of it does matter to some extent, and it gives a class an advantage. But then also you have classes that don't really have one. So like, yeah, Shroud is obviously incredibly useful in dungeons. Doesn't matter at all in raid. But you have like classes that don't do anything. Like, let's talk about how little shamans are used right now. And this is what I talk about on my stream all the time. And again, you have to look at it from different perspectives. If you are a really good player in your guild at, again, US or world rank, whatever, like literally everything except for like the very top of the world rankings, you will do just fine on Enhance and Ellie. They're both completely fine. However, when you're talking about why I would ever put a shaman in a raid, even if they did as much damage or 1% damage more or 2% damage more than any class in the game, like even then you're like, okay, do I bring it over an immunity? Do I bring it over a class that is better at doing this? There are classes, Sub-Rogue, Arcane Mage, Moonkin, Shadow Priest, Warlock that are better at doing very specific types of Windwalker Monk for large bursts and short windows that are better for doing very specific things. And that's cool that classes have that, but some classes fall behind and they need to be compensated for that. Like DKs, you know, the blood DK is so prominent that a class having grip as their utility is not good enough. They need to do a ton of damage, which this tier they did. DKs were great. Shamans did not follow that same suit, which was the problem. So if the class is going to be that, you know, without use for like why you would bring them, their damage needs to be very strong in situations like that. And it's not. And that's kind of the issue. I mean, Ankh is one thing that's fine. Astral Shift is one of the best, if not the best personal in the game, actually. But it's just not enough to bring over the Fodom classes. I mean, they do very good. Ellie does very good stacked up to target cleave. Enhance is actually very good. But it's just like, you know, when you're running 5 to 6 melee, and the next year you can run more melee, but like an old year, 5 to 6 melee in a fight, 2 of them are raid buffs, probably 1 to 2 of them are rogues. And then you have 2 more spots, and Frosty Case, as prominent as it is, where do you find a slot for that? In any guild, not just a World First guild, literally any guild that is either following what a top guild is doing or using logic on why you'd bring something into a raid, you would shy away from classes like that. So yeah, I feel like it's a nice idea that every class has their niche, but they need to, instead of nerfing everything, they need to buff the things that are not the problem, but like, you know, that it needs to be addressed. Yeah. That's how I feel about that.
It's a tough one. I'm reading chat through here, and there's a lot of talk about the like homogenization back and forth. I think it's an interesting idea that if composition is obviously the big part, composition, the gear you're wearing, the talents you're using for Mythic Plus is neat. It would be definitely really nice if every key you ran just gave you Fort, Int, and Shout, and all the mobs just had the debuffs on them, or just remove the debuffs from mobs in Mythic Plus to put everyone on a similar playing field, because that would allow you to bring sort of whatever you wanted to bring. But then at the same time, it devalues those debuffs and buffs on the classes that have them, but also makes them just kind of dumb to have in the first place, because it's bad when you don't have them, not good when you do. Because it's just this circular logic that Blizzard keeps using, it feel. But Munkky, you have to be soaking up a lot of this stuff from what you've been reading. I don't know if do you have any deciding factor on this last little bit before we get into, because I'm sure chat has questions for us and I want to make sure we move along for them.
No, I mean, I don't have too much. Just real quick.
The wide eyes, just like, yeah.
Nah, I mean, one thing though, I just want to point out real quick is just that,
sure.
Because, you know, we started out with the question with, like, you know, having the 4 warlocks for Gahoon or the 5 rogues for Zol, you know, class stacking in that vein. You know, one thing that people have to realize is that the people that are making this game, they're a company. And they have to do, you know, they have to go about things a certain way. It takes time for things to happen or to come out. So if they truly wanted to get rid of class stacking and raids, they would have to look at all the mechanics that they're making for the fight. They would have to look at the room for the fight in the case of the warlocks. They would have to look at every single spec class. What do they bring? So, like, you know, for the rogues, the reason why we bring rogues for Zol is because because of Shurikenstorm with the Krogs, and you literally add a 3rd tank whose main purpose in that fight is to keep the Krogs going, keep them alive, and let the rogues just use them for extra damage. Or in the case of warlocks for Gahoon, you know, having 2 gates on each side just helps people, so it makes it faster, and it makes it so that way people that don't have mobility can just go up, they click on the button, and then they click on the gate, and then they jump back down, you know, and it's done. So the thing is that people just need to realize that, and this goes with balancing and all that, is that there's so many different factors to the game that they will never be able to get rid of class stacking. Yeah. Because of not only this, because of they are such a big business. And on top of that, you know, most of the people that come up with these strats, method, limit, etc., you know, most of these guys have been playing since, you know, for at least 6 to 8 plus years, and most of them have been playing since vanilla. So a lot of the fights are the same. And one of the things you often hear within the community is, oh, you know, like when a new fight's coming out, you go, oh, that's just like X mechanic from Argus, or that's just like X mechanic from Butcher, or whatever it is. So people have the prior experiences, they have the things to relate it to, and they go, okay, so this fight is a combination of Argus and Butcher, so we're going to go about it in this way because these were the strats that we used back then. And, you know, and there's various things that people do, and it's just, you're never going to truly get rid of class stacking because of just the way that it is. It's a business, and at the same time, it's a game that people have a lot of experience, and people are far better, the community is far better than Blizz even realizes. So that's all my piece.
That was a good point that came up in chat, that it's okay for classes to be better in some situations than others. I agree. The problem is when some specs or classes are better in all situations than others. True. I think a big prolific problem with that, though, is these multiplying buffs, right? The magic damage debuff and int, the attack power debuff, and the physical damage taken debuff. And those are huge factors to pushing harder content. So we'll see if they did something about it. I always argued that if they put, you know, both the fact that the physical damage debuff, magic damage debuff were essentially on all melees, why don't 2 ranged also bring them? And then the 2 ranged that bring the raid buffs, why didn't 2 melee bring the opposite? And the same thing with shout going on to a ranged. I don't see a reason why, if they want to focus on those 5 pieces of the puzzle, why they don't
but
this problem
has occurred honestly before buffs.
Right.
This problem was here in whenever the last time we had buffs was. It was like was it Mop or Wad, one of those 2, and it was before that, and in the time during and before it. Hunters, mages, warlocks, rogues, warriors, those classes have had like one bad tier in the last like 7 to 8 years.
Yeah.
Every tier they're strong, usually for the exact same reasons, but also they have people making sure that their damage is always competitive. and other classes do not have that as much. I don't know exactly how Blizzard works, but that is like 100% true. And I don't know exactly why that happens or how it works or what goes into that, but it's definitely like, so there's a reason you keep stacking the same classes. They have the same things that are always good in the raid content that they produce for a reason. Like rogues, like even when rogues damage is bad, for at least until like demon hunters were a thing, like no melee class had that consistent of an immunity. Like before they made feint on a cooldown like that, I mean, even it's still insane, but like, its usability in raid and its survivability on a good player is just like unmatchable. So if they do, and I was about to say, if they do less damage than other classes, they're being brought, but they have 3 specs, and historically one of them has always been top tier. I think the only thing I can point out for rogue is Highmaul. Like Highmaul, they were like decently like middle of the, like, I mean, even then it was middle of the pack, but like in Highmaul they were middle of the pack, and the only reason that was so prominent was because there was another leather melee being Windwalker that just did so much damage than everyone else, and that's when you noticed it. But like think about, I mean, one, Highmaul didn't matter at all, but like that's just how it is.
Hey, Margok mattered for me. So I enhanced with Shaman, and as the one thing I've had that I was like,
that was the last time that that enhance was at at a level where like you want this class, and even in its only time where it was that good, you only wanted 1 because 2 would kill them. So it was like even at its best point, it wasn't even stackable. It was like a one thing. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're completely right. It's been at a place for a long time.
Yikes.
That can only be changed by not even tuning. Just like kind of like a general undertaking of what the class should be good at and why it's good at it.
So that's good. Before chat freaks out too much about Shakib's knees, I'm going to move us along real quick here so we can integrate some questions from chat. So if you guys want to step away for a moment, maybe you want to go, handle that knee thing, you can you have a couple of minutes while I jibber jab here for just a moment. But thank you for tuning in today. Of course, if you are new to the show, episode 176. If you've missed past shows, they are all archived on the show's YouTube channel, linked down below, or if you're watching it on YouTube right now. If you want to do audio only, do that, of course, through Google Play Music or iTunes. Just look up FinalBossTV. Then you're good to go. The additional podcasts, which I'll plug here in a moment, are also RSS feedable. But because we're talking about Azeroth, and if you haven't seen, she has a Mercy skin in Overwatch now. I've been working with Fabelina for a very long time. This is the Guerrilla-inspired Battle Azerite Days shirt, especially for the 8.1 stuff on the horizon. So if you want to support the show, the stream, and everything in between in a more physical sense, then that, of course, is located at our Design by Humans store. There's a whole bunch of designs there. So if you are a fan of Fabelina art, or you want to do Tutron or the other artists that I've worked with, those are all down there. These are just, of course, the defaults. You go through here, and then you can design and pick the fabric, the color. If you want to do sweatshirts, hoodies, tank tops, racerbacks, whatever you would like to do. These have text and no text, and then they are in women's and men's sizes for the Azerite Day shirts specifically, but there are many more on there as well. A little Pupper and Anduin is right there. And then again, the additional podcasts specifically are no thanks, of course, needed, but I'm going to anyway. These nerds right here supporting the show all this dang time and reaping the benefits and rewards therein, physical or digital or otherwise. This is actually the November amount. We have to get the December one updated here real quick. We've been busy behind the scenes for the December patrons, but those are over on the show's Patreon page, right over there. So they're always either after shows or pre-shows. You just go to the Patreon BTS tag right here, or you can go just sort through Battle for Azeroth. You can go back to the BlizzCon stuff, World First shows, the Legion shows we had, if you want just more ramblings with the guests that I've talked to. If you want the actual show notes to see how I run this thing, and then you keep going back. I've had it, this is like 3+ years old now. You got the Jesse Cox and Krendor show. We've got the Preach and Novel post BlizzCon show. Whole bunch of extra things, and of course the main shows over on YouTube. And then if you just want more of the show, check out the Patreon page, and that should be it. Again, if you missed any of the plugs in the early part of the show, all are in the YouTube description box, or we tossed a whole bunch of them in chat earlier. Or if you need them, hit me up on Twitter. I'll send them all your way, or Discord, or wherever have you. So I have some canned questions. On top of the canned questions, I'm sure we will have questions from chat. I think we're all good. Shaq, where'd the knees go?
I took care of them. Don't worry.
Okay.
They'll come back in a bit.
Okay. All right. So, chat, if you have questions, I know that if you're not watching the show live, both Shakib and Max have been in chat all over the place. I think Monkey's been tossing some things in there too, answering questions and things as it flies by. However, bring back the knees. The first thing I wanted to bring up as a fun topic, as chat catches up to us, the anatomy of a fun encounter for tanking. So what have been some of your most favorite bosses in the history of World of Warcraft from a tanking perspective? But what about those encounters specifically was fun and not just a math puzzle, right? So, Monkey, you all have different ideas here, but what would you bring up as a fun encounter for you and why?
Honestly, I like it when it's a little crazy. So like in the instance of you can't just figure it out on the, within the first 2 pulls, because tanking lately has been just, taunt at XX or tank gets debuff, other tank taunts, tank with debuff, runs out of the raid, explodes and runs back, and then waits 30 seconds and repeat. That's how tanking, those 2 ways have been tanking for the most part. I like it when it's a bit crazy, when it takes you, a little bit of time to figure out what's going on. The more hectic, the better. The fights that I've really liked are like Black Hand or Imperator. I did like a bit. Black Fuse is probably my favorite fight.
There he is. I was waiting for that. Yeah.
Yeah, he's probably my favorite fight though that I've personally done, tanking or otherwise. But yeah, so it's just like the more hectic, the better. The more you have to do, and just when they change things up, like even Sakrathar a little bit was, you had the robot job, and it was easy because really you were just spamming 1, maybe 2 occasionally, but like, it changed it up a little bit, and you had one tank doing one thing, one tank in the robot. So it's nice when it just breaks the monotony,
Right. Sounds good to me. We'll stay on the rating train here then. So Max, what about you? The anatomy of a fun boss fight.
At least for me, it's difficulty. I think the main reason that just in WoW in general, I think the average tank player is not at the same level of DPS or healer, is because a lot of the stuff, like I said, it is, or like he said, it's very repetitive. A lot of fights it is taunt at this time. Like you go into a fight, you're like, okay, what stack do I taunt at? It shouldn't be that way. Although, it's really hard to get creative with it. And I will say a quick plug about their next raid. The testing for it has been kind of rocky, but the bosses are all extremely creative, and it's definitely has a chance to be like a very, very good raid if it's done correctly, which we are all hopeful for. But fights that stick out in my mind, and I guess you could make any fight as you want harder on tanks, right? Because if you ever feel like you're just tanking at X stack, you could always just hop on a character that's a little harder to live on, but you can do way more on, depending. But obviously, again, that's a very seclusive thing. It's like a very specific part of the community where that's like the norm. I would say Zul'Harak from Hellfire Citadel, where you had those debuffs, and if you screwed that up, like 100%, your raid is over. Another fight, Helya. Guilds did this differently depending on.
I'll shake your hand on that one.
Yeah. Guilds did this differently, but having the tanks solo every single tentacle, while also tanking the boss, you can, if you ever feel it, most of the time when you ever feel like when you're on a boss, you can make it harder. For example, this tier, when Feta Devourer wasn't killable in its release state, we had it decently low 1 tanking. And that was something where like you can always push yourself to like try to make things work. They're pretty against having things like that happen, and it hasn't really been viable in a long time. But like that was something where you can kind of push yourself, and like Helya is the best example. When you add that much difficulty and you take it away from everyone else and you put it on a few people, hopefully you can trust, that becomes way more of a fight, because then it just becomes a thing you're saving cooldowns for. It becomes a boss tank mechanic when you arrange it that way. I think Tyrant Valhari, very close to Zul'Harak, where you had the reduced health. In the last phase, you had to be extremely proactive with the damage you were taking and almost never reactive, because by the time you were reacting, you were dead with 60% less health when a boss that hit very hard. And historically, this has actually gotten way better. And in fact, as much as like you can be you know, put off by Blizzard's direction of tanks. Like if you look at the direction of how fun tanks are to play and how intuitive it is from like Mist of Pandaria, it like grew to Mist of Pandaria. And I'm not even talking about the offensive portions of Vengeance. Like obviously that was extreme, obviously very fun, but like just forget about that. Like even like Mop defensively, you had such control, you could make so many plays.
Yeah.
It was so fun to play as that role, and it grew to that. And then ever since then, it's been getting progressively worse and worse and worse and worse. Where they want, you know, they want the nostalgia of like a healer being in control of a tank's health. Because I mean, admittedly, it was a little out of control. Like the fact that you literally did not need to even put a beacon on a Death Knight at the end of last expansion. Like yeah, that was out of control. In Mop, it was out of control, but it can definitely be way farther towards that than it is now. But you know, as that's happened over time, you know, you have to just try to make it challenging. One, for your sanity, and two, because you know, if especially if like a DPS's job is hard on a fight and a tank's is easy, you should do whatever you can to ease the difficulty of that and make it on something else. So, yeah.
There's a lot in there, and I'm just shaking my head at Twitch chat right now. Gorek and Mia are fighting over gifting subs right now. Had a 30 stack, had a 5, had a 50. So I don't want to take anything away from your question, but I have to give them at least a nudge. The big point that's funny that you bring up there, and I'm gonna go to Shakib on the same question next, because very different in your realm of what makes an encounter in the raid boss versus almost like the entire Mythic Plus run is the boss, right? Well, if it's fortified, it's the trash and the trash pulls, because the bosses just fall over most of the time, versus tyrannical bosses and some of them being way more tricksy than others. So then a big thing, and this is a big question to reiterate, Shaq, because you got a lot of angry YouTube comments coming if you don't get this right, or depending on what you say. Mythic Plus being longer / boring compared to Legion Mythic Plus. But do you like Legion Mythic Plus better, or do you like BFA Mythic Plus better? Like how does that work?
From a tank perspective, I preferred Legion, because I feel like you just had a lot more control. The pools felt bigger in most cases. Right now, you just can't. Most of the time, you won't be able to handle as much. So, I don't know. Like a lot of dungeons, like Max is saying right now, King's Rest, for example, just doesn't. Like you kind of have to follow the route, and you can change maybe 1-2 packs,
right,
and that's it. So dungeons like that really aren't really that fun, especially at a high level when you're trying to do different strats. Definitely not the stuff I'm looking for. Dungeon like Waycrest can be fun, but then again, there's the RNG on that side, so that's another annoying part. You have to have 3 different routes set up every single week with the different infested patterns. That gets in the way too. But like for the fight parts, some of the most fun fights that I've had were like the first boss in Temple or the Triad in Waycrest, where you've got just a bunch of stuff, like a bunch of mechanics throughout the fight.
Right.
You got to take care of, instead of fights where you just take a certain amount of damage on the tank. So definitely those fights are a lot more fun.
Okay. So definitely it's a different paradigm between the two. So it's quite curious. Yeah, chat brings up, I mean, Legion had a lot of extra hooks, gear swapping, legendaries, artifact stuff, definitely. But and then the criticism I see a lot too in chat is that BFA dungeons are very linear, but that's also because they're more intended as that esport because of the MDI. Legion was a beta test for that, and they designed the dungeons to be more linear so that they could actually make them more competitive. So I think that's
from
a necessary evil.
From an MDI competitor's standpoint, and I can say this for everyone that competed at the LAN or the regionals, every person would rather. I mean, there's so much more fun and competition in dungeons being non-linear and being able to figure out ways to make it better. Like I think a perfect example is like how you saw our team and the Method EU team do like a completely different lower strategy, because like and do the spiders instead of that entire room and stuff like that. Like that was stuff that like people didn't even, you got to play around with that with the new groups trying it, since a lot of people didn't do high keys, still don't do high keys. and they, you know, that was like, you know, that was so much fun because like you were watching it and you're like, oh my god, what are they doing? Oh wow, they have like a 14-minute time in this dungeon. That's insane, and they did something completely different. Like I feel like that's even more of the competition and skill. I'm not sure if they've ever stated that they like it being linear. I think they clearly put a lot more. They put a lot more design and developers on making dungeons. I think that's very clear. Right. But in turn of that, they made it so there's consistently so many things that keeps you from doing very crazy pulls. Like you're not going to see very crazy pulls in any high keys now. Like the only time you're going to see anything change is when the MDI comes out and people are on the tournament realm. You can keep making the same key over and over again, just try stuff and perfect it and do like crazy pulls, try different classes, everything's at the same gear, obviously that kind of stuff. Like what you're going to see now is mainly just like a repeat in the safest way instead of like the actual fun way. But I mean, just in general, the dungeon design, like in Legion compared to BFA, I mean, it's not even close. Like Legion dungeons were like potentially like some of the best set of dungeons ever. I mean, Court of Stars might be the best dungeon ever. And they had, you know, there's nothing this expansion that really, there's a couple of good ones, but some of them are just like, you know, people don't even run them on purpose. Like it's pretty bad.
Yeah. But then there's counterpoints that come up, right? So Shroud is a way to make dungeons non-linear. Mass pulling isn't very interesting to watch. People brought up challenge modes were way more fun than Mythic Plus. It's everyone going to be different opinions, right? So I like challenge modes myself. That was a neat, the Mop and the Warlord style of challenge modes, not Mythic Plus, but it's Warlords dungeons. Hello. Some of them were okay, but
you got to separate nostalgia from the actual content. That's hard. Yeah. Always hard to do. Much of the reason why WoW Classic is.
Oh, stop! You said the C word, Max.
Oh, my bad. My bad. Back.
Here's sort of a side question I saw in chat. How do you find a raid guild as a tank? Most groups will usually have those set in stone already.
Oh, this is a great question. If you guys don't mind me answering, I answer this question. It's extremely difficult.
Well,
in fact, this is kind of why tanking has kind of got to this point where, I mean, I made the comment earlier and I can explain a lot of the philosophy behind why I think that is, but like where tanks are at right now is because, you know, and obviously like a lot of people, I mean, Mythic Plus, the advent of Mythic Plus has helped with this, but a lot of people don't really know what good or what the theoretical limits of being a tank is, because what do you know? What is a good tank to you? If you're a regular person and you've been raiding for 5 years, let's say that person's been in 3 guilds, maybe 4 guilds. I mean, it might be 1, but let's just say on average, like 3. You've raided with like 6 to like 8 tanks, right? So that's your player pool. Raiding in 1 guild ever instantly and for 1 week gives you twice that sample size of another role, right? And then and also that position never feels like they have to be replaced, because you know it's very abstract for a guild if you have 2 tanks that you're in quotes happy with, regardless. Like and that kind of breeds complacency and a bunch of other things, but like that role is kind of never like it's just how this is in WoW. If you have 2 tanks, then you're good and you replace them when they quit. Usually what you'll see top guilds do most of the time is, you know, when they have a tank quit, or like recently we wanted to improve and we just had one of our best players go tank, because trying to recruit a good tank, especially a career tank, like someone who's only ever tanked, a good one, is impossible. Like I have no issue trialing anyone. Like if anyone wants to trial in this guild as a tank, like please, I could tank or I could DPS, Darky could DPS. There's so much room. I mean, we just want a good player at all costs, no matter what the role or class or anything. It doesn't matter. But like most guilds do not operate that way, because a lot of them are based on friends, and like they don't want to, like if you're 2 tanks in a guild and you recruit a 3rd, that because it's so abnormal, one of them is going to feel like they're trying to be replaced, and that's usually going to end badly in one way or the other.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of how the role's kind of gotten to that point. I mean, healers, you have like 6 healers, so like in usually only 5 raid spots, or 5 healers, and then like people come and go, you can replace, you can try new people. DPS, it's like, you know, there's so many good ones because it's the most fun thing to play outside of progression, that, you know, there's a ton of good DPS in the game. But like I said, a lot of people that are okay in their tanks because they're like, okay, my tank doesn't die, or sorry, or my tank only dies a little bit, or, you know, because obviously like people's relative term of good for how good a player is entirely based on the ones that they've played with, and again, the sample size is so small that they don't know that they could get much better and they don't want to risk it because like, what if it's worse? You know, it's like such a unique and important role. Less important when you have stuff with videos. Like I think I realized this in our first time going for world first. Like having, you know, good tanks is so important. And it's not like, if you look at tanking as like, oh, just put them on a monk and they won't die most of the time. But like the difference between like a good monk and a bad monk can like be double the amount of tank healing required, which can increase or decrease the amount of healers you need. The ability to play every single other class at a competent level, like the amount of support you can give, the ability to DPS. I think that's like the main thing I usually use as a way to argue this point. Is like in most guilds, top world, very casual guilds, all guilds, especially more towards the top, they're more likely than not, if you were to have them trial as a different role, most likely DPS, they would not be able to raid as much in that guild. And whenever that's the case, that's a time where the position needs to be upgraded. But again, upgrading it is just so taboo that people don't really do it.
Right. There's a lot of stuff I'm reading about in chat about this stuff. And it's good, there's bad, pros and cons to this whole thing. I like the point. So people being able to tank during off hours for Mythic Plus also helps the entire roster of your guild as well, because you really have like 2 tanks. They're not always going to be on. So then how do you do pluses that help a lot outside for raiding? Which that all comes back around. I mean, if Sierra's out there, somebody can chime in the fact that one of the top MDI teams was built in the group finder. So making your own group is also a huge point. But that's a tough one. That is a tough one. And are there any ways, any resources out there in the community that you want to, that come to mind, Munkky, to find guilds? I usually just tell people to go look at, you look at WoW Progress, you look at either the faction you're looking for and the realm that you think you fit in, and just kind of go through the docket of them. That's just a lot of legwork, though. I don't think there's any real easy way to look at it. It's a tough one.
It's one of those things that you kind of have to just expand your reach. You have to. WoW Progress is one of the best tools because you can see what people are actively looking for. Usually, recruitment officers or GMs, raid leaders, whatever, they're usually pretty good about keeping their WoW progresses up to date.
Yeah.
So you can use that. You can see, you know, and with that tool, you can see, you know, what do they already have. So if you're trying to come in as a tank, you can see, all right, what tanks are they running with right now? What are they, you know, how are you in comparison to their current tanks? How are, you know, what strats are they using, whatever. And then you, outside of that, there's I think there's 2 recruitment discords. I know of one. The other one, I want to say there's a second one, but I can't remember off the top of my head. I know there's at least one of them. It can be okay, but it's mostly people like trying to look for people for their guilds. And then a lot of the class discords have recruitment
true.
channels that you can post your recruitment for your Discord or for your guild in there, and then just, you know, if you're looking for a guild, then you can go look through those. And then like a healer chat should have one, tank chat has one, and then but honestly, like one of the main things that you'll find as you move up in the ranks is that you get into the higher guilds more so by knowing people than when they actually are looking for stuff on WoW Progress. Is that, you know, you'll be playing in a guild and you got a friend in another guild that's maybe a little bit higher than you, and you're talking with them, shooting the shit one day, or, you know, whatever. And and then you know, and then you go, oh, you know, I'm not really happy here, and they go, oh, hey, we happen to be looking for your role. You want to, you know, you should come up to us. And that's kind of, you know, that's how I got in where I am, and that's how I know where, you know, a bunch of friends have gotten into different places. Just knowing people, just meet people. Dungeons are very good ways of meeting other people. If you do it with a friend who has a friend, and then now that friend is now your friend, and just expand your reach, expand the amount of people that you know, be more open to playing with new people. And, you know, you can find guilds through that. I mean, to a lesser extent, you can also even do it with bugs. So I know plenty of people that have made a full Mythic Plus group purely out of bugs. And then if one of those are looking for a guild, like that's 4 other people right there that you play with regularly that could potentially get you into a guild that's, you know, either better for you or a better ranking guild or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
So
how about this is sort of the question, the situation I brought up on all these shows now. I want you to share a horror story. So, oh my gosh, this boss is so boring. All I do is taunt at 3 stacks and then just stand here. So, how about some tank or tanking horror stories you've experienced, either recently or just in the game as a whole? And I want to know a Mythic Plus horror story from Shakib. Give me what you got. It has to be real bad. Put someone on blast.
As me tanking or as someone else tanking? I've had some very interesting tanking stuff back in Legion from someone else when I joined the Pug.
Uh-oh.
So I was, it was a necrotic week, obviously it had to be. And I felt like DPSing because it was late at night. I just wanted to watch a movie and do some keys. I was like, I think 4 or 5 curious coins away from getting that mount. That was like 150.
Ooh.
So I joined one of the Moss Souls group, and then when I get in, I see not 1 Guardian Druid, but 2. And then I'm like, they have to have a strat for this, or they know something. They're gonna do a little special trick. And we get in there, they pull like the whole thing at the start, and we get smashed. And that was just like, that dungeon probably took the longest time I've ever done a Pug, and I don't think I've pugged since.
Wait.
I think that dungeon probably just ended my Pug life. I just logged off, and the next day I just made my own group.
Oh,
Like that,
no.
that was the last time I remember pugging a dungeon.
That's the key point. That
2
experience.
druids. Yep, on necrotic. I just couldn't. I don't know. That just. I'm terrified now.
Uh-oh. Well, there's a new necrotic in BFA, and Resto Druids can either get ahead of it or fall behind the same way. I don't know. That didn't come up at all in the show yet. That's a really tank-focused affix that was tweaked recently. Well, first off, it actually works now, apparently, versus the Legion version, which was... I don't know why it applied at 1, but then ticked at 2. Okay. Blizzard math. But how about Max? Do you have tanking or tank horror stories?
Oh,
you're right. No,
like
that's
a
not
horror
necrotic.
story.
That's Grievous. Yeah, I got Grievous Necrotic confused. Didn't they nerf Necrotic too? Both and Grievous?
They didn't nerf necrotic. No.
Yeah.
Well,
They made it physical, but the damage you've taken from necrotic has never mattered. It just makes it so you can't spell wording it and you can't AMS it, but you can still bop it. It basically just makes it worse to deal with for specifically Death Knights, and the damage portion has 0 effect on anyone else. No.
Yeah. No, but the Grievous was the stack, the bleed specifically myself. Yeah. I got confused.
I don't have any experiences because, well, I mean, I have some, obviously, like I'm not gonna like flame anybody, but I have, like, you know, I think I did a Pug a couple weeks ago on stream, and it was because someone asked me to, and I didn't know what I was going to experience, and I saw some shit in there, like that was real. Like there's definitely like that, but I'm like completely like removed from that. Like I think up to that point, I probably hadn't done a Pug dungeon raid or anything without anyone from my guild at any point.
Yeah.
And so I don't have too many situations like that. I mean, for us, like, if we're doing farm and, like, you know, we've had some people tank in the guild in the past on their alts, like, years in the past, just to give a time frame where it's, like, no one current. And they, like, you know, they might die a couple times and then not say anything. And then, like, you know, instantly, like, everyone's just, like, that's just, like, so in farm. Like, you know, that's just, like, complete nightmare fuel. Right. So, yeah, that's about as bad as it gets for me. Because, like I said, I'm sure if I lived in the wild world of doing Pug content, I would see some stuff. But, yeah, I don't really.
All right. Munkky, how about you? Do you have any horror stories you can talk about, or ones you've read about by chance?
Honestly, off the top of my head, I don't have any. I mean, it's stuff that happens quite frequently, more so in Pugs, like Max was saying. But I mean, we get the occasional story in Discord, but honestly, no, not off the top of my head. I mean, most of the boring stuff is just like, the swap at X to X, and then you just sit there and you fall asleep in your chair.
Well, I mean, it could also be you. Have you done something horribly wrong in the past, or something you thought was, because that in Mythic rating, you'll also hear that don't be a hero. Like, never try to be a hero. I've done it on stream before. I was like, I can do this, and I'll eventually retreat the wave to get to my soak on Gahoon faster. But apparently it's coded that the actual wave follows you in the eventual retreat. So I landed and blasted 2 or 3 ranged right next to me on my landing point. So that's, I'll take the blame for that one. But what I'm trying to find is those moments. A lot of it comes back down to the pug world. That's unfortunate. But how about, this question came up in chat as sort of another Q&A I can bring up here, is there a place or need for an actual off tank in recent raids, or even potentially in the battle for Dazara Lore? This is outside the 2 tanks. So you have 2 tanks, but then you have like the off tank, kind of like Zool. You'd have 2 tanks on Zool, and then you have the Vengeance Demon Hunter, or whoever else on the Kraugs. That's the only time we've had an off tank recently, I think. Which you could actually do with 2 tanks. It's just easier with an off tank, if you want to call the 3rd tank that. But very rarely. From raid testing, Max, have you seen anything that you would run more than 2 on?
No, there's a few where you might run less than 2. But that just depends on how they tune it. But no, nothing like that. It's always the thing. It's never something you know ahead of time, because you test the bosses, and I mean, every top guild loves doing PTR, because it's like, that taste of progression where you're figuring out something fresh. It's super fun.
Sure.
So you try a bunch of different stuff. So you don't have a lot of time to think about stuff like that. I mean, definitely, like, what are the last couple of 3 tank bosses? Agrimar, Argus on Mythic. So the last 2 bosses of the previous raid, and then Zool. But I mean, the only reason DHs did Zool is because every raid had a DH, and then that class was like okay for doing the kiting thing. But honestly, I mean, we haven't 3 tanked it in a very long time. There are plenty of other tanks that are better. In fact, as much as I was kind of spitting facts about where Guardian's at the moment earlier, that's like the one situation actually where Guardian is very strong. Is pretty much only rivaled by the Paladin last tier talent, the one that gives them the damage increase and reduction based on how many mobs are around them. Is in a 2 tank scenario on Zool, or just tanking any kind of specific fight where you are tanking a mob that hits very hard, but then you have Thrash on like 15 to 16 things. The rage generation from that makes that class extremely strong, with how Ironfur doesn't cap as easily in this expansion. Like stronger than the other tanks, but it never reaches that point on anything less than 5 targets, and that's most likely not what you see in raids. And their damage and utility is so poor in dungeons that you don't see that, but that makes them at least a decent bit stronger. But again, to the other point, the 3 tanking thing is something that they don't see that as something they want. Like, they're pretty adamant about, like, they do not want that to be a thing. I mean, it didn't really need to be. I mean, Argus wasn't necessarily, it was a 3 tank if you didn't have 2 monks. If any guild had 2 monks, you just 2 tanked. I think Exorcist and in the top 5 world, at least 2 were 2 tanked, and the other 2 were 3 tanked. And that was just because the other 3 guilds did not have 2 monks.
Right.
2 monks, there was no need for it, because you could easily, when you weren't tanking, just have the movement to soak it all as a monk. But like Argus was more just because, or Agrimar was just more because only Blood DK had like that ability to do the slows and the grips, and they just had and it was, you could do it on DPS DKs, but it just wasn't as consistent. And again, the only thing you ever 3 tank or 5 heal, for that matter, in today's day and age, every 5 healable boss in recent memory has been 4 healable on progression and now. It's just that you reach this point where you're like, is the 5th healer going to help consistency to where damage is not an issue on this fight? Like, the issue is living. It is not damage at all, where you could drop, 10% of your damage, 8% of your damage by dropping a DPS, depending on the class, and you could bring in an extra healer, and that's going to make this easier to kill in progression. We will kill this boss faster doing that. And that's usually not something you see until you get to a boss and you're like, oh, okay, we could do this. Let's try this, let's try adding a tank, and maybe that will solve some of the problems we're having. And then we do that. It's something you always do on the fly, and not really stuff you plan to do ahead of time, unless it's very obvious, like like the Agrimar thing. And I'm trying to think of some in the past that were like very obvious 3 tanks, but it's never really that obvious, because at any time you can test something and they can release it and then completely change the numbers. For example, I'm sure other guilds did this, but like we like killed Fetid Devourer on testing, like on Mythic, just straight up like killed him. And so we didn't even like prepare for that boss. We're like, all right, this boss is a joke. It's like easy to deal with. The strat is easy. And then we get on live and they buffed it by 200%. And it's like, you have to lust and use all of your cooldowns to kill it one time. And they weren't nerfing it at the time. So like we were just sitting there with that whatever head start we got doing nothing until, you know, the EU people were there. And then that was like, you know, just stuff like that. So you can't really plan because their tuning of bosses' health specifically changes so much. But yeah, it's something they don't want. It's something I really, you know, I will make sure that it can be done with 2 tanks before we ever do the 3 tank thing, unless like it's well, okay, you'll add a 3rd tank and then you're like, okay, it's really not that necessary. We'll take it away. Like we did on Argus. We had a 3rd tank. And we're like, it's not worth it. Like we could just have so much more damage, so much more consistency. It's just about making decisions on what actually efficiently helps you kill the boss you're doing.
Nope, that sounds good to me. We'll sort of go around the table here real quick. If you have any sort of closing remarks, shout outs, or plugs in that regard, as well as any tidbits of knowledge you would like to drop on the tanking community. And Munkky, we'll start with you first, sir. If you want to, any closing remarks, any soapbox time. This is for you. Go.
I mean, we talked about most everything. Just if you really want to progress as a tank, you know, be active in the community. Utilize your class Discords, utilize YouTube, Twitch, all that. Be more open. You know, don't be a hard head about everything. There's always room to improve. And if you think that you're the best in the world, then you're not. There's always somebody better than you, and there's always something you could do better. There's whether it's, you know, taking less damage, you know, giving up DPS for survival, which a lot of people need to do. People focus too much on the DPS side and on ranks. Try to, you know, sometimes you'll help your raid out. Well, in general, help your raid out more by going for survival. Sometimes it helps to have more DPS, but you know, it just be more open to everything and all that. So otherwise, yeah, utilize the class Discords, Wowhead, Icy Veins for guides and your specs. Like we said earlier, take notes for the raid, and method dungeon tools for Mythic Plus, all that stuff.
Sure.
Yeah. So
Shakib, what about you? What do you want to leave anyone with? Do you want to bring the knees back up for a moment here? I don't know if that's important.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's good.
Oh gosh, there we go.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What do you, closing remarks? Soapbox time, sir.
Yeah, I'd probably say like I kind of went over a little bit earlier. Definitely for Mythic Plus, mainly. Like, don't try to keep your own route. Like, try to always optimize your route, change your strats, check around, check a bunch. There's a bunch of streams. Like now even more than before, the Mythic Plus is growing, so you can always. There's so many people that you might not know of that you can find pretty easily just by posting in like more known streams. You'll see there's a bunch of commands for big tanks, so you'll be able to find out a lot of info there. You can ask them a bunch of questions. A lot of them will just answer you all day long.
Sounds good to me. Max, take us home. Soapbox it. What do you have?
I'm not a part of any like community, like tank community or class community. You won't ever find me in a place like that. I actually just recently started full-time streaming in the last month. I'll be doing that right after this, and I do that every day starting right around when this show started. So if you ever want to ask any kind of tank questions or anything like that, we will I'll be glad to answer you. And also, just follow the guild limit. We're about to make our big push for the old world #1. So wish us luck in January. That is all.
I'm very curious to see how the battle for Dazar'alor will play out, considering what happened in Uldir and the fact that it's that weird split mirror raid, even though all the world first guilds are Horde, unless Limit's about to go Alliance just to shake things up.
People ask me that all the time. They're like, why doesn't Limit go Alliance? And I'm like, and I did the math, and it's like, one, to take all of our usable progression characters to Alliance, it's going to cost like just about 9,000 Blizzard bucks. So
oh,
definitely not going to do that.
Are you sure?
That's like,
no.
Yeah. I mean, I have no issue with being Alliance. I mean, there's like a lot of, I mean, I don't care if I'm Alliance or Horde. There might be some people in the guild that are partial to Horde. There's definitely some that want to go Alliance. If it's ever like, the thing is that everyone's been Horde for a while, and it gets a very bad rep. Like people say, like, oh, people are Horde for the racials. The racials are to repeat. What faction you were has never mattered for World First ever. And on KJ, you can say the thing about goblins or whatever the hell Alliance had. That like Method would have gotten World First no matter what. They were so much better than everyone else in that tier. So it's never mattered. There hasn't been enough of a skill gap where something like that has mattered. So it's just gotten to the point where it's so much easier for recruitment, I think, to be on a Horde, because like having people have that extra, for us it doesn't matter, because like if we're going to get someone, they'll transfer regions or transfer, that doesn't matter. But like for most guilds, like 99% of guilds, if it's an extra thing to have to faction transfer to go there when you have 1 million to pick from in your time slot.
Yep.
So it's just progressively gotten. I mean, I just started doing some Mythic viewer raids that do like 5 or 6 out of 8 Mythic in a couple hours, and and just heroic raids like on Alliance versus Horde are so vastly different, because the amount of people that play the game a lot on Alliance compared to Horde is like, I mean, it's like you can't even compare the two things. It's so much different, and it's almost exclusively because of that.
Yep, there were some analytics that just came out about that were tough to read. There was a big Wowhead post about it, showing the trends over the last couple of expansions. It's awkward, but that's it for us. That's it for the show. There's, of course, more on the after show. We'll record here when we get here. Let me hit this button and close it down. Thank you very much for tuning in to episode 176 of Final Boss TV, the state of tanking in Battle for Azeroth. Of course, we have all these spec shows on the horizon starting in 2019. I wanted to wait for like the real launch of the game, so 8.1 is around the corner, and then we'll be able to get all the different individual spec shows, all 36 of them. Oh boy, starting next year. But thank you to my guests today. Munkky, you can go follow him over on Twitter. Find him in the Discords at Munkky with 2 Ks with a DH on the end. Thank you very much for returning to the show, sir. It was a pleasure. I appreciate it.
Of course, anytime, man.
We had Shakib and his knees. Oh, they're still there. Also on Twitter. Also with a DH at the end of his name. What's up with that? Thank you very much for your time on the show today, sir. I appreciate your insight into the keys, the pluses. Thank you very much. And then there's Max. Again, limit _maximum. He streams now, apparently. You do the stream? Why are you muted? Why would you do that to yourself?
Just started. Sorry.
Professional streamer, by the way? No.
Yeah, definitely not. I have a lot to learn, but yeah, I've been streaming for a little over a month now. There you go. Thank you very much for your time again, sir. I appreciate you. I'm going back to Shaq. He didn't say anything. Say something to the audience. Say. Hi.
Have a good night, guys.
No, well, there you go. That's fine. So again, next week is going to be the state of Melee. More details on the guests coming in the week after that. And then, of course, there's a week off for the holidays, and then the year-end special, talking about the upcoming epic WoW battles of history. Taliesin and Evitel and my buddy Brutal will be on that show, because it's Horde vs. Alliance, and Brutal's Horde and I'm Alliance, and then T&E are going to be co-casting the event. So stay tuned for that, of course, in the future. If you want to support the show more directly, go check out the merch. The Azurite Day shirt by Fabelina, or just give Fabelina some love on Twitter, because she has a freaking Mercy skin in Overwatch now that she designed. It's awesome looking. But thank you for tuning in, and until next week, everybody. Bye. Now you can wave. Wait. Bye. Okay. What is that? Okay, there. That's better. Thank you.